It's choose your own adventure time. Well, no, not really. The Netflix film Look Both Ways has already chosen the adventures for us, so we get to watch two what-if scenarios with Lili Reinhart. Is it worth the effort? On the eve of her college graduation, Natalie's life diverges into parallel realities, one in which she becomes pregnant and remains in her hometown to raise her child, and another in which she moves to LA to pursue her dream career. The approach to telling this story is both kind of unique and kind of odd. We're shown two different paths that our main character Natalie can take immediately following her college graduation, and it depends on whether or not she's pregnant. Lili Reinhart plays Natalie, and she gets to show us both versions, and I do think that she does a decent job of tackling the role. But first, let me address the way that the story is actually told. Now, sometimes in a story where there are multiple paths that a character can take, we're shown one and then the other through maybe a dream sequence, or maybe it's shown in a way that everything is hypothetical. In this, we get to watch parallel stories play out. So beginning with the graduation night, which then comes at the start of the movie, we then follow down two paths and the story bounces between the two as we go along. Now, I wasn't a fan of the way that it was being presented at the start of the movie. It took a bit to be drawn into the narrative because as I was getting invested in one story arc, the film would then change to show us the other. And those changes broke me out of the journey, and then I felt like I was almost starting over and connecting with the narrative. With that being said, somewhere in this, my brain kind of got used to the switches and then it accepted them, which then made it more of a cohesive experience. I think it probably was about that halfway point when this began to happen, so just know that it could take a few beats for this to click for you also. Now, I liked Lili Reinhart through a lot of this. She's charismatic, but there are moments where she's more annoying than sweet. She can be a little whiny, but that typically doesn't last long, and she's back to being enjoyable. Danny Ramirez also stars in this as Gabe, and he's a charismatic character, pretty much always being supportive and there for Natalie. And this is also a theme that follows Natalie throughout the movie, regardless of the story arc. She's surrounded by friends and family that are incredibly supportive of her. We don't really get any naysayers in her situations. Now, when there is conflict, it's usually brought about by Natalie herself as a result of her situations. I don't believe there were ever any moments where there was true antagonism directed towards the character from any outside entity. And that's not a bad thing. It just shows that sometimes we can be our own enemies and we don't need external forces to create chaos or drama. Now, the overall story is cute, but it's also long. And that's just a result of the dueling storylines. There were spots in the hour and 50-minute runtime where I felt the time going by, but this wasn't constant. But then as we begin to get into the final act of the story, I was getting a bit impatient with some of the pacing. The last act does speed up things a little though, that was nice. Now, something that I wasn't a fan of in this show is how parts of Luke Wilson's character were written. Now, he plays Natalie's dad. And there are times when he's both kind and caring, but he's also shown as a typical dumb dad, fumbling and bumbling like he's useless or ill-equipped to handle situations. It's not that he's always that way, but when the story wrote scenes like this for him to be the comedic relief in a sequence, it was off-putting and not very funny. There were other times, though, when the character was just reacting with the scene, not having to be confused or stupid, and then he created some good comedy. So it was just a mixed bag of what we get with the character. Another thing that stood out to me more odd than anything was that Gabe's band plays a few times in the movie, and every single time we hear them playing We Are Young by Fun. Now, I'm a fan of the song, but come on, if we're to believe that they are up and coming and progressing as artists, then we don't need to hear the same cover multiple times. We don't hear them play anything else, even just the start of something. The performance is fine, but it just made me think that they could only get the rights to one song to play live, or that it's the only song that the singer could do convincingly. Now, I'm not sure of the real reason, but that's where my brain goes when I hear the lack of variety from a band within this story. Now, I do like the growth journey that Natalie goes on through this. The two storylines, while they are drastically different in arcs, they still are very similar in the lessons and then the baseline experiences that are available to be learned. I enjoyed watching those progressions because in some ways they're relatable. I mean, not necessarily in the specifics, but in the overarching themes of pursuing dreams, facing perceived setbacks, and then finding your voice. Lili Reinhart is convincing in these areas, giving us humility and passion. Now, from a technical standpoint, this looks fine. There's nothing that stands out as either spectacular or horrible. I mean, it's a quality production. Now, something that was a little odd at the very start, but began to grow on me, was the use of these sketch animation transitions. Now, Natalie is an illustrator within the movie, so the imagery makes complete sense and it fits, but the way they're presented at first gave me a Diary of a Wimpy Kid feel to them. Now, this quickly passed, and then they just became title cards that showed up every now and then. So overall, Look Both Ways shows us a what-if scenario in a simultaneous parallel story presentation that I don't believe that I've seen executed in this way before. The acting is good with characters that are mostly endearing, but also they're very supportive. The positivity is refreshing and it creates a wonderful tone for the story, too. The comedy is lighthearted and it leans more towards a feeling of sweetness than a laughter. And while the runtime feels a little long, by the end of the story it was engaging thanks to a character journey that's uplifting and relatable. I think this is great for a casual watch and can leave you with a satisfied feeling regardless of the character path that you're more attached to. There's a tiny bit of sex, no nudity, some profanity, and no violence. I give Look Both Ways 3.5 out of 5 couches. So are there any movies that have a what if scenario that you enjoy? Let me know about them in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.